Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore.
Have you ever gone on a long journey? I mean, a journey that took you ways away from home for an extended period of time before you came back. I know many of our graduates are looking ahead to college, and that will be kind of a big journey in and of itself. The story that comes to my own mind, of my own life experience, was when I was in college, not going to college itself, but rather the semester I spent abroad while I was in college. I had never had any international experience up until that point, and so my semester abroad was unique. It wasn't just going to another college and studying there. Instead, a group of us, 16 of us in fact, traveled around the Mediterranean along with a professor, and we studied classical antiquities. And we just basically lived out of a backpack, and we went from Crete to Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Italy, France. Every few days we were on the move to a new location. And so we got pretty adept at, washing our own clothes in the sink and learning how to navigate new cities, how to read train and public transportation schedules, no matter what language they were in, and managing money exchanges and living on a pretty tight budget, as we stayed in hostels and provided, our own food from street vendors and cooked over a camp stove sometimes. And basically, we just learned, I look back on that semester and I think that was when I learned to take care of myself. And I didn't realize how much I had changed and how much I had grown until the semester was over and I came back home. And people who knew me and loved me, and they said, "Dave, you are different." Something had happened. And I think that's the point of all journeys. It's not about the place that we're going to, even though that may be the reason we go on the journey, but often our journeys end up at some point bringing us back home. And it's the things we see and the experience we have and the lessons we learn along the journey that change us, and so that when we come back home, we're no longer the same person we were. That's what journeys are about. There's a particular kind of journey that we call a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage, a journey towards a specific site, often a holy site. When I traveled abroad, I had the opportunity to see a couple sites, pilgrimage sites, St. Peter's in Rome, the Blue Mosque in Turkey, and they were different because they weren't just tourist attractions that people came to. They were steeped in history and tradition and most importantly, sacredness. People came to them to worship, to seek something. I looked it up online, a definition of pilgrimage, and I love the last one here. It says, a journey often into unknown or foreign place where a person goes in search of new or expanded meaning. It reminds me of a quote that I found from Ernest Kuntz that says, "A journey becomes a pilgrimage as we discover day by day that the distance traveled is less important than the experience gained." I asked you if you've ever been on a long journey before, but I think what I'm asking really is, have you ever been on a pilgrimage? If so, then today's psalm is for you. It's a psalm of pilgrimage. It's part of a collection of psalms that begins the chapter before in Psalm 120 and goes for 15 chapters to Psalm 134. These psalms taken together are called the Songs of Ascent. They were songs that were meant to be sung during a pilgrimage. In that day and time, in Jesus' day and time, the place where you journeyed for a pilgrimage was most often to the city of Jerusalem, the temple. And Jews would have made, many devout Jews would have made that pilgrimage once every year, if not for Passover, at least for some other festival in order to be present. And so all the psalms of pilgrimage, the songs of ascent, and the reason they're called Songs of Ascent because you can see a picture of the temple here. It's kind of built up on a hill that you traveled up to the temple. And so all of these songs are shorter, more compact, no 176 verses like the 119th Psalm. They're all 8 to 10 verses, things that you can memorize, and they're portable. And they all focus on God's protection, which people would have needed, if they were traveling a great distance. We know Jesus' family made this pilgrimage as well. We find it in Luke chapter 2, that they left their homes in Galilee and for 3 days traveled to Jerusalem and 3 days traveled back. And so we know that as they made this journey, they would have been singing these songs of ascent because they were making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Even the way the Psalms are laid out kind of convey that sense of journeying. The very first one, Psalm 120, locates the reader, the listener, far from Jerusalem. Verse 5 says, "Woe to me that I live in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. For too long I have lived among those who hate peace." Now, Meshech and Kedar are not the same place. One of them is way up in northern Turkey. The other is way south on the Arabian Peninsula. They are both thousands of miles apart from each other and apart from Jerusalem. So when the psalmist kind of uses those locations, he can't be clearly in two places at once. They're thousands of miles apart, but he's using them as a metaphor to express what it is like when you are far from home. When you are a sojourner living among people among whom you are a stranger, they don't share the same values, they don't share the same loves, and what it's like to miss being home. And then if you skip forward, skip over Psalm 121 a second and go to Psalm 122, there you have the expression of joy when you get home. "I was glad when they said unto me, we will go into the house of the Lord, for our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem." It's a psalm of praise and joy of finally the journey being over and being home once again. And my point is this, is that today's psalm, the 121st Psalm, lives between those two. Lives between Psalm 120, being a foreigner in an unknown land, being far from home, and Psalm 122, when you finally arrive. Psalm 121 is a psalm for the journey, whenever we are journeying home. Now, when I first planned this psalm series, I had planned that this Sunday, Pentecost Sunday, would be the last in the psalm series, but I planned on finishing actually with the 122nd Psalm. "I was glad when they said unto me, we will go into the house of the Lord." And the reason I did that was because I had hoped, wished, thought that we would be back in church on Pentecost Sunday. And that was my hope. And so I thought, man, we're going to end it with, "I was glad when they said to me, let us be back in the house of the Lord." The reality is we aren't there yet as a church, but even as a country. This journey, we have not yet come home. The journey has lasted longer, and we don't even know exactly when the finish line is going to be. The reality is we are still somewhere between Kedar and Meshech and Jerusalem. We're still journeying. We're in what William Bridges calls the neutral zone in his book, Transitions. the space between ending and losing and letting go of what was, and embracing a new beginning of what is, we are still somewhere in between those two. This is the diagram that appears in his book, but I always thought it made the neutral zone look a little too clean. I prefer this diagram that I found. I thought that's what the neutral zone feels like, because it's confusing, it's topsy-turvy, you're never quite sure which way to go. That's what it feels like, and that's where we are right now as a church and as a country. We're all kind of going in different directions. Graduates who are watching this, be aware that you are heading into the neutral zone. And I don't intend this as bad news. The neutral zone is a time of discovery and rediscovery and exploration, but there will come a time, as you say goodbye to one chapter of your life, it's not like suddenly a switch is flipped and you begin the next one. Instead, there's a neutral zone, a journey. And there will come a time where you are no longer who you were, but you're not quite sure yet who you're going to be. And in that space, when you're feeling alone and confused, I want you to remember the 121st Psalm, because it is a psalm for the journey. It begins with this wonderful declaration, I lift up my eyes unto the hills, and then a question, where does my help come from? Well, why is the psalmist needing help? Remember, this is a song of a journey. And so if you were a pilgrim in that day and time, walking on foot along a long path to Jerusalem, your eyes would constantly be scanning the horizon, because from the hills is where danger would come. That's where the bandits would descend. So I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where's my help going to come from if I'm under attack? And then comes the answer. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And those last handful of words, those last 5 words, they transform the whole meaning of the mountains. Maker of heaven and earth, those words are so impactful that they made their way into the Apostles' Creed. You realize that? I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And so for multiple millennia, faith-filled Christians and Jews have been reciting this phrase. And it transforms the hills, because suddenly then the hills aren't a source of distress or worry. They're not a threat, they're a source of comfort. Because our help comes from the one who made the hills. And he is our help and our deliverer, so we don't have to be afraid. And then verse 3 starts, and it introduces a word that will be repeated throughout the 121st Psalm. It says, he who keeps you will not slumber. Indeed, he who keeps Israel will never slumber nor sleep. Now pay attention to this word keeps, because then verse 5, the Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. And go on down to the bottom, the Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. I highlighted the sentence there in the middle, verse 5, the Lord is your keeper, because those words appear smack dab in the middle of the 121st Psalm. They are its heart. In fact, in Hebrew, if you were to count the syllables before that verse and after that verse, you would find that the syllables, there's an exact same number of syllables on either side. That's how important that line is. What the psalmist wants us to know is the Lord is our keeper. But what does that mean? The word's actually kind of difficult for us to translate in English. There's lots of different translations. You would have noticed, I hope, that when Nikki McKnight read it just a few moments ago, she didn't use the word keep, she uses the word watches over, because that's how the New International Version translated, the God watches over us. And other translations use the word guard or protect. So which is it? Is it watches over, keeps, guards? Well, it's all those things. Go forward just 2 chapters to or 6 chapters to Psalm 127, and you see this word appearing again that says, unless the Lord watches over, keeps the city, the guards keep watch in vain. So this word keeps, it has a sense of vigilance, of protection and care, that God is keeping and watching over us. Think about something that you keep. I mean, versus something that's disposable and you throw it, but the things that you keep are the things that are precious to you. You hold on to them, you hold them close, you cherish and treasure them. That's the sense of this verb, that the Lord keeps us, that we are precious to him. He cherishes us, and he watches over and protects us every step of the way. The psalmist goes on to outlay in this psalm 3 different dimensions, I think, of the Lord's keeping. The first is in verse 3. He tells us, he will not let your foot slip. He who keeps you will never slumber. He won't let your feet slip. Think about it. If you're a pilgrim making a long journey, one of the worst things that can happen to you is for your foot to slip, for your ankle to turn, for you to hurt yourself as you're making the journey and be unable to walk. And so the promise is he's not going to let your feet slip. He's going to make your footsteps firm. God will guide you in the right paths. He'll show you where you should walk. It's a promise of both guidance and grace. Now, I wish, graduates especially speaking to you, I wish I could promise you that that you're never going to take a wrong step in life. Wouldn't that be wonderful if he made every single one of our footsteps firm? But the reality is every single one of us at some point is going to take a wrong step. We're going to step into something that we wish we hadn't stepped into, or we're going to step on some place that looked solid and firm, but then we quickly realize was just a trap, and our legs are trapped. But in those moments when we misstep, I think this is where the promise isn't just guidance, but also grace, is that God will lift us up, put us, kind of dust us off and put us back on the path, keep moving us in the right direction. I've thought about this a lot the last couple weeks, because I have certainly prayed for guidance and grace as we've had to make decisions about the church and when to reopen the church. And let me just say right now, if you're wanting to know when the church is going to reopen, please stick around to the end of the message, or the end of the service. At the time of the benediction, I'll share with you some of our latest plans for reopening. But I've felt the weight of these decisions, and I've prayed all the time, God, give me guidance. Make the path clear. Show me what steps I should take, or that we should take as a church. And it's frustrating because I don't get any magic beacon saying this is the date on the calendar, like no aura and holy light that says this is what I should choose. In fact, more often I find myself getting drawn back to the first Bible verse that I ever memorized, my grandmother's favorite verse. It goes, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not on thine own understanding. And all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I saw it as one of the verses that the graduates had in our video earlier. And I often find myself kind of pointing to the last promise of those verses. He shall direct your paths. And so I say, God, direct my paths. Tell me what I should do. And instead, I feel God drawing my attention back to the beginning. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. As if God is saying, not audibly, but just whispering, nudging me and saying, I'm much more concerned about your heart than I am your decisions. If you just learn to trust me with all your heart, then you can trust that I am your keeper, and I will take care of your decisions. I will make your footsteps firm. But first, you trust in me. And in that trust, we discover that God is our keeper. So the first promise is guidance and grace. And then comes a second promise. The Lord is our shade at our right hand. So the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. If you've ever made a long journey in grueling heat, you know how precious shade can be, to kind of, for just a moment, escape the beating of the sun's rays down on you. But the word shade here means a lot more than just a place of rest and refreshment. The Hebrew word that we translate here as shade, it most often appears as part of a phrase, especially in the Psalms. And in that phrase, it's not just translated shade, it's translated shadow, the shadow of God's wings. Like here's just a sampling of a few verses. Psalm 17:8, hide me in the shadow of your wings. Psalm 36:7, all people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. Psalm 57, in the shadow of your wings I take refuge until the destroying storms pass me by. And Psalm 63, for you have been my help. In the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. In other words, when the psalmist, Psalm 120 says, the Lord is your shade, the right image is not a tree spreading out its branches. The better image is that of an eagle spreading out her wings and protecting her young. That's the symbol of the Lord's protection and care, a sign of vigilance and watching over us until we are safe. Now, does that mean that bad things don't happen to us, that we're protected from all harm, that no evil thing will befall us? I wish I could make that promise. But just as your feet sometimes will misstep, sometimes also bad things will happen. But I don't think the promise of God's protection, it means that, all adversity will be absent from our lives. Rather, I think the promise of protection is that when adversity comes, we can trust that God is present with us, that he's watching over us and protecting us. Go back to Psalm 23, one of the first Psalms we considered in this series. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Sometimes we all walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but there's that same word, shadow. But even there, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. You hold Psalm 23 and Psalm 121 together. It's almost like, yes, sometimes we all walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but we don't have to fear that shadow because the shadow of God's wings is covering us and protecting us. And in that we have our peace and our trust. The psalmist declares, the Lord will keep you from all evil. He will safeguard and protect your life. We can trust in God's protection and care. And then comes the third layer, the third dimension of God's keeping, the third promise. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. Picture the gates of a city and people going out and people coming in. That's the image of the Lord keeps watch over that passage. As some scholars suggest that this is even a reference to a battle, perhaps, like a host, an army going out from the city to meet the enemy and coming back in either victory or retreat. The Lord will watch over and protect them in that moment. But for me, I guess I don't need the image of the battle. I think for me, the simpler image that resonates with me is just the idea of home. That for all of us, there is a place where our journeys begin, a place where we belong. And from that place, all of us journey out, and all of us return back home. And the promise that I think the psalmist is lifting up is that in those journeys, whether we're going out or whether we're coming home, every step of our journey, God is with us, watching over us, keeping us. And I would even go so far as to say that God can make whatever place we journey to our new home. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Jacob and his vision, Jacob's ladder. That's the way I learned it in Sunday school, is the story of Jacob's ladder. It wasn't a ladder, though. It was really more of a staircase or a ramp. But when I was a kid, when I was in Sunday school, I never understood that story. I didn't really connect with it. This vision of angels descending and ascending, going up and down. And because my own personal experience, I've never had these visions or dreams. That's not been the way I connect with God. I never quite got it. It wasn't until I really understood where Jacob was at that moment. You see, this is his first night away from home. He stole his brother Esau's birthright Esau is so angry, he threatens to kill him. And so in haste, Jacob runs away from home, and he's journeying across the desert to seek out an uncle that he's never even met before and to try to find shelter there. And this moment and this night, he is completely alone and isolated. You want to talk about making a misstep. His whole world is falling apart in that moment, and he's sleeping on the desert floor. His only pillow is a rock. And in that place of isolation and fear, when he feels like his world is coming apart, that's when he has this dream. And it's not the image as so much as it is the promise that God gives him that holds his heart in that moment. God promises, know that I am with you, and I will keep you. I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Those words always remind me of a more contemporary song by Philip Phillips called Home. He says, settle down, it'll all be clear. Don't pay no mind to the demons that fill you with fear. Trouble, it might get you down. You get lost, you can always get found. But no, you're not alone. I'm gonna make this place your home. I had to jump octaves there. I didn't start in the right key, but that's okay. That's the promise that God is giving Jacob. That you're never going to be alone. I'm going to make this place of isolation and fear, this place where you feel completely alone and lost in the world, I'm going to make this your home. And you can rest in my presence. And I think all of us at some point we end up in some place in our journeys where we do feel lost and alone. We don't know where we are going or where we even are. But in that place, we can always remember the promise that God is our keeper. He is with us and he provides us home in the wilderness. So you put this all together and you see all the dimensions of God's care for us as keeper. That when we are lost, God gives us guidance. And when we fall down, God gives us grace. And when we are in distress, God gives us protection and care and the comfort of his presence. He watches over every step of our journeys through the wilderness. And when we come home, he is always ready to receive us with open arms of joy. The Lord is our keeper. And we can trust in that promise. And when we trust in God's love, and when we trust in God's protection and care and presence, then our hearts experience rest and renewal and peace. Truth is, I don't know how long this journey will last. This journey that we're on right now, I know it's going to shape and change our church. It's going to shape and change our world. And we're just all still buckled in for the journey. And graduates, I don't know about your individual journeys, where God is going to lead you, what you're going to do. Some days I don't even know about my own journey, where God's going to lead me. When I first planned this Psalm series, I had planned that this Sunday, Pentecost Sunday, would be the last in the Psalm series. But I planned on finishing actually with the 122nd Psalm. I lift my eyes into the hills, and I remember that the maker of the hills is the maker of my heart and the keeper of my soul. And he will keep us and watch over us until we rest forever in his heavenly home. Amen. Now, throughout this series on the Psalms, after the message, we've had a song of reflection. And normally the song of reflection has been brought by our ensemble, but today we have something special. This would have been, normally we wrap up the choir season about this time. And so all the choir has sung a song, the Psalm 121, and sent it together. And through the magic of editing, we've put that together for you to enjoy. So I hope you'll enjoy this and it will lift your heart. And we say thank you, and we love and miss all of our choir members. Let me close my message and lead us into this time of reflection with a prayer that was sent to me by an Episcopalian friend of mine. It's a prayer for a long journey. It goes like this. Be to us, O Lord, a support in our setting out, a comfort by the way, a shadow in the heat, a covering in the rain and cold, a conveyance in weariness, a protection in adversity, a staff in unsteady ways, and a port in shipwreck, that with you being our leader, we may reach the place we seek, and at length we may return again to our home in safety. Amen.
Shall not sign me